Harrison Whitmore slammed his fist on the mahogany desk so hard the crystal whiskey glass shattered. "That crazy old woman is finally dead," he snarled into the phone, his 73-year-old face twisting with 50 years of hatred. "But her grandson just showed up at the property, a Special Forces soldier. He's poking around the outbuilding." He listened for a moment, then laughed coldly. "I don't care if he has a Medal of Honor. I've waited half a century for those samples to stay buried. Send the team. If he finds what she hid, we lose everything. Billions. Do you understand me? Billions? And I will not let some homeless veteran and his brat daughter destroy what I've built. Not when we're this close." Before we continue this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and follow until the end. Comment below with the city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The letter found Marcus Cole in the last place he expected to be found. He was sitting in the VA hospital waiting room in Fayetteville, North Carolina, staring at a crack in the linoleum floor and trying to remember the last time he'd slept more than 3 hours straight. His left leg throbbed where the IED had torn through muscle and bone 18 months ago. The discharge papers in his pocket said honorable. The nightmares said something else entirely. "Daddy, I'm hungry." Emma's voice cut through the fog in his head. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and a way of looking at him that made his chest tight. She'd learned to say she was hungry only when it got really bad. Most of the time, she pretended she wasn't. "I know, baby, soon." He had $47 left, a half tank of gas in the truck, and no idea where they were going to sleep tonight. 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 medical discharge that came with a handshake and a prescription for pills that made the shaking worse. And now this, sitting in a plastic chair with his daughter waiting for a bureaucrat to tell him his benefits application was still processing. "Mr. Cole." He looked up. A woman in a gray county jacket was scanning the waiting room with the expression of someone looking for a ghost. Marcus Cole, Sergeant First Class Marcus Cole. His training kicked in before conscious thought. He stood positioning his body between the woman and Emma. In his experience, people who used your rank meant trouble. Debt collectors, process servers, the wrong kind of memories wearing official clothing. "Who's asking?" The woman consulted her envelope. "Haywood County Probate Office. I've been trying to locate you for 4 months, Mr. Cole. You're not an easy man to find." 4 months. That was the distance between having an apartment and losing it. Between Sarah walking out and Marcus realizing he couldn't hold his life together any more than he could hold his hands steady. "What do you want?" "It's about your grandmother, Eleanor Cole." The name hit him like a punch to the chest. His grandmother, the small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the smell of pine sap and wood smoke. Summers spent there as a kid when his mother was chasing whatever man or job or escape was calling her that month. He hadn't seen Eleanor in 15 years, hadn't called in 10, hadn't thought about her in 5 except in those quiet moments when he wondered if anyone in his family had ever figured out how to be happy. "She passed," Marcus said. "Not a question." 2 winters ago. I'm sorry." The woman extended the envelope. "The estate was complicated, some legal disputes that took time to resolve, but you're the last living heir. The property is yours now." Marcus took the envelope slowly. His hands were shaking again. They always shook now. What property settled 47 acres in the Appalachian foothills? A house, some outbuildings." She paused. "The county assessor notes structural concerns, but the land itself has value. You might consider selling." Emma tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, does this mean we have a house?" Marcus looked down at his daughter. Her shoes had holes in them. Her jacket was 2 sizes too small. She hadn't slept in a real bed in 6 weeks. And somewhere in the mountains of North Carolina, there was a cabin that belonged to him. A cabin with walls, a door that locked. A place where his daughter wouldn't have to pretend she wasn't cold. "Yeah, baby," he heard himself say. "I think it does." He signed the papers right there in the waiting room. The woman from the county looked relieved, like she'd been carrying this burden for months and was grateful to set it down. "There's a note," she said, handing him a yellowed envelope. "It was with the deed. Your grandmother left instructions that only you should open it." Marcus took the envelope. His name was written on the front in Eleanor's careful, cramped handwriting. The same handwriting that had addressed birthday cards he'd stopped opening years ago. The same handwriting that had filled the margins of old books with notes about plants and weather, and things she swore the mountain had taught her. "Thank you," he said. The woman nodded. "I'm sorry about your grandmother, Mr. Cole. She was persistent. She came to the county offices every month for 30 years requesting records about some mining company. People thought she was a little eccentric, but she never gave up on whatever she was looking for. Marcus felt something twist in his gut. His grandmother had always talked about the mining company, about stolen land, about secrets buried in the mountain. His mother had called her paranoid, bitter, a crazy old woman who couldn't accept that life had dealt her a bad hand. But his grandmother had also taught him to track deer through fresh snow, to read the weather by the way birds flew, to survive on nothing but stubbornness and faith. Maybe she wasn't crazy. Maybe she was just patient. "Come on, Emma," he said. "We've got a long drive." They drove through the night. Emma slept in the passenger seat, wrapped in the army blanket Marcus had carried through 3 deployments. It smelled like sand and gun oil and a life he was trying to leave behind. Every few hours he'd look over at her, at the way her eyelashes rested against her cheeks, at the small frown she wore even in sleep, and he'd feel something fierce and terrifying grip his heart. He'd failed at almost everything: his marriage, his career, his sanity, but he would not fail her. He would not let his daughter grow up the way he had bounced between relatives who didn't want her always knowing she was a burden. The GPS died somewhere past Asheville. Cell service followed 20 minutes later. Marcus navigated by memory and instinct, following roads that grew narrower and more neglected until pavement gave way to gravel and gravel gave way to dirt. The mountains rose around them like sleeping giants. In the darkness they seemed alive, watching, waiting for something Marcus couldn't name. He'd forgotten how big the silence could be out here. In Afghanistan there was always noise. Helicopters, gunfire, the constant hum of generators and radios and men trying not to die. In the cities afterward, there were sirens and traffic and the endless drone of a world that never stopped moving. But here the silence was absolute, heavy, like the mountain was holding its breath. Dawn was breaking when they reached the final climb. The sky turned pink, then gold, then the deep blue of a day that didn't care about your problems. And then Marcus saw it. The cabin looked like something that had been holding its breath for decades and finally exhaled. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired spine. The porch had collapsed into a tangle of rotted wood and morning glory vines. Windows gaped dark and empty. The whole structure seemed to lean slightly as if listening for footsteps it had stopped expecting. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small. "It's really broken." "It is," Marcus said, "but it's still standing. That counts for something." He helped Emma out of the truck and they approached the cabin slowly. His training cataloged the details automatically. Single visible entry point, sightlines obscured by overgrown brush, multiple escape routes through the surrounding forest. Defensive position, isolated, the kind of place where no one would hear you scream. He pushed that thought away. The front door swung open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of gray light. The walls were rough-hewn timber darkened with age. The floor groaned, but held. A cast-iron stove squatted in the corner, cold and patient. His grandmother's rocking chair still sat by the window facing the mountain as if waiting for a conversation to resume. "It smells like Grandma's house," Emma said softly. Marcus turned to look at her. "You remember Grandma Eleanor?" Emma shook her head. "No, but this is what I always imagined a grandma's house would smell like, old and safe and a little bit sad." His throat tightened. She'd never had that. A grandmother, a family home, a place that smelled like memories and belonging. "Let's see if we can make it less sad," he said. They spent the morning exploring. The kitchen was dusty but intact. The bedroom at the back of the house still had an old iron bed frame with a quilt so faded it had lost its colors. The root cellar beneath the house was solid, carved into the mountain itself. And in the kitchen drawer, exactly where his grandmother used to keep important things, Marcus found the note. The envelope was yellowed with age. His name was written on the front in her careful handwriting. Inside a single page, Marcus. "If you're reading this, you found your way home. Good. I always knew you would, even when you didn't. The mountain has been keeping secrets for me. Now it's time for you to learn them. Trust the old sergeant. He remembers what I couldn't tell you when I was alive. He'll show you where to look. And Marcus, I'm sorry I couldn't make them believe me. Maybe you can. The truth is buried, but buried things don't stay down forever. Love always, Grandma Eleanor. P.S. Don't trust anyone from Ridgeline. They've been waiting for me to die. Now they'll be waiting for you to fail." Marcus read it 3 times. His grandmother had always talked about Ridgeline energy, about illegal drilling, about secrets and stolen land. Everyone said she was paranoid, but this letter didn't sound paranoid. It sounded like a warning from someone who had been fighting a war no one else believed was real. "Daddy," Emma was standing at the window, pointing toward the tree line. "There's a horse outside." Marcus moved fast, hand automatically reaching for a weapon he no longer carried. Through the cracked window, he saw a shape emerging from the forest. Large, moving slowly, ancient. A horse, silver-muzzled, walking with the careful dignity of something that had outlived its right to exist. The animal stopped at the edge of the yard and stared directly at Marcus with eyes that seemed to hold decades of waiting. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "Sergeant, his grandmother's horse. Named after her husband who'd served in Korea and never come home quite right. Marcus had ridden that horse as a child, had learned to brush him, feed him, clean his hooves. Sergeant had been old then. That was 25 years ago. Daddy, is he real? He shouldn't be, but he is." Marcus walked outside slowly, hands visible like he was approaching something dangerous. The horse watched him come, ears forward, nostrils flaring. "Hey, old man, you remember me?" Sergeant nickered softly and pressed his nose against Marcus's chest. Then deliberately the horse nudged the pocket where Eleanor's letter rested. Marcus pulled out the note. Read the line again. "Trust the old sergeant. He remembers what I couldn't tell you." The horse turned and began walking toward the forest. After a few steps, he stopped and looked back, waiting. "Emma, get your jacket." "Are we going with the horse?" "Yeah, baby, I think we are." They followed Sergeant into the trees. The forest swallowed them quickly. The canopy blocked out the morning sun, leaving them in a green-gold twilight that felt like stepping into another world. Sergeant moved with surprising sureness, following a path Marcus only half remembered. Past the creek where he'd caught his first trout at 7. Past the boulder shaped like a sleeping bear, where his grandmother had told him stories about the Cherokee. Past the ridge where the sunrise used to paint everything gold. Emma held his hand, her small fingers tight with trust. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "I don't know yet. But we're following a horse." "Your great-grandmother trusted him. That's enough for now." They walked for 20 minutes, climbing gradually until Marcus's leg began to ache. The physical therapy exercises he'd stopped doing whispered accusations in his joints. But Sergeant was slowing too, and finally the old horse stopped at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood a structure made of stone. Low, solid, almost bunker-like. The wooden door was reinforced with iron bands that had rusted but not broken. Deep scratches marked the frame. Claw marks or something trying to force entry. "Daddy, what is that?" Marcus approached slowly, circling the building with instincts he couldn't shut off. No windows. Single entry point. Built to last. Built to hide something. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a groan. The smell hit him immediately. Damp stone rust and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet. He pulled out his phone, activated the flashlight, and stopped breathing. Crates. Dozens of them. Stacked floor to ceiling, covered in dust and cobwebs, but solid. Each one marked with a faded logo, Ridgeline Energy Corporation, and a date from the 1970s. "Stay here, Emma." He found a rusted crowbar leaning against the wall. The wood protested but gave way. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating canvas, were metal cylinders. Heavy, cold despite the warmth of his hands. Each one stamped with coordinates and depth measurements. Geological core samples. The kind taken during mineral surveys drilled from deep beneath the earth. He unwrapped another sample. Another, all identical, all stamped with coordinates that fell directly under the land his grandmother had owned. Land she'd claimed was stolen from. Land everyone said she was paranoid about. "Daddy, what are those—" "Evidence," Marcus said quietly. "Your great-grandmother's evidence." A branch snapped outside. Marcus killed the flashlight, grabbed Emma, pressed them both against the cold stone wall. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. They were always steady when danger was real. Through the crack in the door, he saw movement in the trees. A figure. 2 figures. Moving with deliberate purpose. Not animals, not lost hikers, watchers. "Daddy." "Shh." He waited. The figures circled the clearing once, then retreated into the forest. Professionals, checking the perimeter, making sure the building was still undisturbed. But it wasn't undisturbed anymore. Marcus counted to 300 before moving. Then he grabbed the nearest core sample, wrapped it in his jacket, and took Emma's hand. "We're leaving now. Don't look back." Sergeant was waiting at the tree line, ears pinned flat. He led them back by a different route faster, as if he understood the danger. By the time they reached the cabin, Marcus's mind was already working. His grandmother wasn't crazy. She'd found something. Something big enough to hide for decades. Something big enough to still be watched after she was dead. And now he had to figure out what it was worth. That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus sat in his grandmother's rocking chair and opened the second envelope. It had been hidden inside the first one, folded so thin he'd almost missed it. More of Eleanor's handwriting, shakier, now written near the end. Marcus, if you found the samples, you found the beginning. But there's more you need to know. I didn't always hate Ridgeline. I worked for them. In 1972, I was the cook at their survey camp. Minimum wage, but it was money, and money was scarce after your grandfather died. I fed the drilling crews and cleaned their equipment and pretended not to notice when they talked business. But I noticed. I always noticed. They talked about the coal anomaly, about readings that went off the charts, about deposits worth more than the whole county combined. They were excited, drunk on possibility, and they were drilling on my land without telling me. When I confronted the site manager, he laughed. His name was Harrison Whitmore. He said I was a poor widow who couldn't afford a lawyer. Said I should take the $100 they were offering and keep my mouth shut. I took the money. I needed it for your mother's school clothes. But I took something else too. Every night for 3 weeks I walked into that survey tent and took core samples, one at a time, hid them in the old spring house until the camp packed up and left. They looked for those samples for years. Sent men to search the property, offered to buy the land at 10 times its value. I said no every time. I was lying. I was also surviving. The man who laughed at me, Harrison Whitmore, he's still alive. He sits on the board of Apex Resources now, the company that bought Ridgeline. He's been waiting for me to die, Marcus. Now he'll be waiting for you. Don't let him win. Love, Grandma Eleanor. Marcus read the letter twice. His grandmother had stolen evidence of corporate theft and hidden it for 50 years. She'd been called crazy, paranoid, delusional. She'd been right the entire time. And somewhere out there, a man named Harrison Whitmore was still waiting for that evidence to disappear. The next morning, Marcus drove into Cold Creek. The town was exactly what he expected. One traffic light perpetually blinking yellow. A main street lined with buildings that remembered prosperity but had accepted decline. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed immediately. The library was a converted church with peeling white paint. Inside, the smell of old paper and dust. A woman behind the desk looked up with the wary hope of someone who rarely had visitors. Help you. I'm looking for information about Ridgeline Energy, the mining company that used to operate around here. The woman's expression shifted. Curiosity mixed with something else. Caution, maybe, or recognition. You're Eleanor Cole's grandson. Marcus went still. How do you know that? Because you look just like your grandfather did when he came home from Korea, and because Eleanor told me you'd come eventually. She stood, extending her hand. Ruth Adkins, I was your grandmother's friend, probably her only friend by the end. She mentioned you'd come. Every month for 30 years, she came here requesting documents, mining permits, geological surveys, corporate filings. I helped her find what I could. Ruth's eyes were bright with old grief. People thought she was obsessed. I thought she was the bravest person I'd ever met. She was right, Marcus said. About all of it? Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. You found them, the samples. In the old stone building, hidden for 50 years. Ruth sat down heavily in her chair. Lord have mercy, she actually did it. All those years, and she never told a soul where they were. She looked up at Marcus with something like wonder. She trusted you to find them. I didn't deserve that trust. I haven't seen her in 15 years. That doesn't matter. You're here now. Ruth stood again, suddenly energized. There's someone you need to meet. Walter Jenkins, retired geologist. He's the only other person in this town who believed your grandmother wasn't crazy. Walter Jenkins lived in a cabin 3 miles outside town, the kind of place that said its owner preferred rocks to people. He was 74, stooped but sharp-eyed, with hands that handled the core sample like a surgeon examining a patient. Spodumene, he said, finally holding the sample to the light. High-grade lithium ore. What's that worth? Walter did calculations in his head, his lips moving silently. Based on the coordinates stamped here, if the vein runs as deep as these samples suggest, you're looking at one of the richest lithium deposits east of the Mississippi, worth billions in today's market. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. Billions. Electric cars, phone batteries, grid storage, everything runs on lithium now. In 1974, this was worthless, used for pottery glaze and some pharmaceuticals. Ridgeline found a fortune they couldn't spend. Walter set down the sample carefully. So they buried the evidence and waited. Waited for what? For the world to catch up, for your grandmother to die, for everyone who remembered to forget. Walter's eyes were hard. They've been sitting on this knowledge for 50 years, watching the price climb, waiting for the moment they could claim the land legally. How would they claim it legally? Unpaid taxes, eminent domain, fraud, a dozen different ways to take land from people who don't have lawyers. Walter paused. Your grandmother fought them off for decades, but she was old, poor, alone. They figured it was only a matter of time. Marcus thought about the figures in the forest, the watchers who'd circled the stone building while he was inside. They know I found the samples, he said. Then you need to move fast, because Apex Resources has more lawyers than God has angels, and they've been planning this acquisition for longer than you've been alive. That night, Marcus sat on the cabin porch and watched the stars. Emma was asleep inside, clutching the old quilt from his grandmother's bed. She'd declared it magical because it smelled like secret flowers. Marcus didn't have the heart to tell her it just smelled like mothballs in time. His phone buzzed. 1 bar of service, barely enough for a text. It was from a number he didn't recognize. We know what you found? Name your price. This can all go away. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back, not for sale. The response came immediately. Everyone has a price, Sergeant Cole. Even heroes. We'll find yours. Marcus turned off his phone and looked out at the mountain. His grandmother had spent 50 years protecting a secret everyone said didn't exist. She'd been called crazy, paranoid, delusional. She'd died alone with no one to mourn her except a librarian and a horse that should have been dead decades ago. And now the people who'd stolen from her were trying to steal from him. They thought he was just a broken veteran looking for a payday. They thought he'd take the money and disappear. They didn't know what he'd learned in Afghanistan, that some things were worth fighting for even when you couldn't win, that the hardest battles weren't the ones with bullets, that patience and faith could outlast anything, even corporate lawyers with unlimited budgets. They didn't know that his grandmother had taught him the same lessons 25 years ago in this same cabin. All right, Grandma, Marcus said quietly. Let's finish what you started. In the darkness, somewhere behind the cabin, he heard Sergeant Winnie. The horse understood. The mountain understood. And soon Harrison Whitmore would understand too. The war was just beginning. Marcus found the 3rd letter the next morning. It was hidden in the root cellar, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. His grandmother's handwriting, shakier than before. Marcus, if you're reading this, you're going deeper. Good. But you need to understand something. This fight isn't just about money. It isn't even just about the land. It's about what they did to your grandfather. William came home from Korea different. Everyone said it was the war. Shell shock, they called it then. But I knew better. I knew my husband. The year before Ridgeline came, William was fine. We were happy. He was starting to remember how to laugh again. Then they started drilling. At first it was just noise, engines and machinery at all hours. William couldn't sleep. Neither could I. But then the water changed. It tasted different. Metallic. Wrong. William got sicker. Couldn't think straight. Started forgetting things. By the end, he didn't recognize me. The company said it was nothing. Said our well was fine. Said William's problems were from the war. But I saw their faces when they said it. They knew. They knew what they'd done. Your grandfather died, believing he was losing his mind. But he wasn't crazy. He was poisoned. They killed him, Marcus. Slow and quiet so no one would notice. And then they called me crazy for saying so. Don't let them do to you what they did to us. Love, Grandma Eleanor. Marcus's hands were shaking when he finished. Not from PTSD, from rage. His grandfather, a Korean War veteran who survived combat only to be poisoned by a mining company drilling illegally on his own land. And no one believed the woman who watched him die. 50 years? His grandmother had carried this alone for 50 years. Daddy? Emma was standing in the doorway of the cellar, still wearing her pajamas. What's wrong? You look angry. Marcus carefully folded the letter and put it in his pocket. I just learned something about your great-grandfather, something sad. The one who was in the war, Grandma Eleanor's husband. Yeah, him. Emma came down the steps and took his hand. Is that why great-grandma hid those rock things because of what happened to him? Marcus looked at his daughter, 8 years old, already too smart for her own good. Yes, that's exactly why. Then we have to help her, even though she's gone. That's exactly what we're going to do. Ruth met them at the library with coffee and documents. I've been pulling records all night, she said, spreading papers across the reading table. Ridgeline Energy operated in this county from 1971 to 1978. During that time, there were 17 reports of contaminated well water, all dismissed as natural mineral variation. 17 families, Marcus said quietly. Most of them dead now, but not all. Ruth pulled out a list of names. These are the survivors. Children and grandchildren of people who complained about their water during those years. People who might remember. People who might talk. Marcus scanned the list. 14 names. 14 potential witnesses to what Ridgeline had done. Have you contacted any of them? I wanted to wait for you. This is your fight, Marcus. It should be your choice how to wage it. He looked at the names again, at the addresses scattered across the county, at the possibility of building something bigger than one man's claim. We'll need a lawyer, he said. Ruth smiled. I know just the one. Victoria Hayes arrived in Cold Creek 3 days later driving a car that cost more than everything Marcus had ever owned combined. She was mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the focused intensity of someone who'd chosen her battles carefully and won most of them. I don't usually do probate cases, she said, spreading the core samples across her conference table, but Ruth called in a favor, and these... She picked up one of the cylinders reverently. These change everything. Can we win? With these samples, with Walter's expert testimony, with 50 years of documented complaints about contaminated water, Victoria smiled. We can do more than win. We can burn them to the ground. She filed suit in federal court 2 weeks later. Coal vs. Apex Resources. Damages sought $1.2 billion. The response was immediate. A black SUV appeared at the end of the mountain road the day after the lawsuit was filed. It sat there for hours, engine idling driver, invisible behind tinted windows. Marcus watched it through his grandmother's binoculars until darkness fell. Then he walked down the road alone, moving with the careful silence he'd learned in Afghan valleys. The window rolled down when he was 10 feet away. A man in an expensive suit looked out at him with the patient contempt of someone used to getting what he wanted. Mr. Cole, I'm David Chen. I represent Apex Resources. I know who you are. Then you know I'm here to make this go away. Chen handed him an envelope. $50 million. In exchange for the property, the samples, and your silence. It's more funds than your family has seen in 5 generations. Marcus didn't take the envelope. What about the other families, the ones whose wells were poisoned? Not your concern. This offer is for you alone. And if I say no, Chen's smile didn't waver, then we go to trial, and you discover what it's like to fight an opponent with unlimited resources. We'll bury you in motions, challenge every piece of evidence, drag your grandmother's name through the mud. By the time we're done, you'll wish you'd never found those samples. Marcus stepped closer, close enough to see the flicker of uncertainty in Chen's eyes. My grandmother spent 50 years being called crazy. She died alone believing no one would ever listen. And you think I'm going to sell her out for $50 million? Everyone has a price. Not everyone. Get off my mountain. Chen's window rolled up. The SUV backed down the road and disappeared into the darkness. But Marcus knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first attack came a week later. Marcus was driving Emma home from the library when he felt the brake pedal go soft. Training kicked in before conscious thought. Downshift. Emergency brake. Aim for the ditch. The truck hit soft earth and stopped hard. Emma screamed. Marcus was already moving, checking her for injuries, then sliding underneath the vehicle to see the damage. Brake lines. Cut clean. Professional work. Daddy, what happened? Marcus pulled Emma close, his heart hammering. Someone doesn't want us here, baby. The bad men. Yeah, the bad men. Sheriff Margaret Wade took the report with the weary expression of someone who knew she couldn't prove anything. Brake lines don't cut themselves, she said, but unless I catch someone with a knife in hand, there's nothing I can do. So they just get away with it. Apex employs half this county. You're asking me to investigate the biggest employer in 50 miles based on cut brake lines. She paused. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying I need more. Then help me get more. Wade studied him for a long moment. Frank Mercer, she said finally. He worked for Ridgeline in '74. Been drinking himself to death ever since. Says he's got secrets that keep him up at night. She wrote an address on her notepad. Maybe it's time someone asked what they were. Frank Mercer lived in a trailer at the end of a road that had given up years ago. He was 71, hollow-eyed, with the tremor of a man who'd made peace with his demons by drowning them. He didn't want to talk. Get off my property, he said through the screen door. I don't know anything about Ridgeline. You kept a ledger, Marcus said. It was a guess based on his grandmother's photographs. You wrote down everything that happened at that camp. Every sample, every drill site, every lie. Frank's face went gray. Who told you that Pout? Eleanor Cole. The name hit like a physical blow. Frank sagged against the doorframe. Eleanor, she knew everything. She was waiting for someone to help her prove it. Silence stretched between them, then Frank opened the door. Come inside. There's something I need to show you. The ledger was everything. Leather-bound, water-stained, filled with cramped handwriting that documented every drill site, every sample, every falsified permit. I kept it because I knew what we did was wrong, Frank said. Whitmore told us the permits were filed, that the Cole widow had signed off, but I saw her face when she served us dinner. She didn't know. She had no idea what we were taking. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was 23 and broke and scared. Whitmore promised me a management job if I kept quiet. Frank laughed bitterly. He lied about that too, used me up and threw me away. I've been rotting in this trailer ever since, drinking away the memory. Marcus held the ledger carefully. Evidence. Real documented devastating evidence. There's going to be a trial, he said. I need someone to testify about what happened. Someone who was there. They'll destroy me. What little I have left. They're destroying you anyway, just slower. Marcus met his eyes. My grandmother spent 50 years waiting for someone to believe her, help me prove she was right. Frank was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. I'll testify. God help me, I'll tell them everything. The war escalated. Week 2. Someone broke into the cabin while Marcus and Emma were in town. Nothing was taken, but Eleanor's kitchen was ransacked. A message. Week 3. A man approached Emma outside school. Tell your daddy some secrets should stay buried. Marcus tracked the man to a motel outside town, confronted him in the parking lot. Daniel Merrick Apex's head of security. Former Army, like Marcus, private sector for 20 years. You're making a mistake, Merrick said. This doesn't have to end badly. You threatened my daughter. I delivered a message. There's a difference. Marcus stepped closer, close enough to see the calculation in Merrick's eyes, close enough to remember how easy it was to kill someone who underestimated you. The last man who threatened my daughter is buried in a valley in Afghanistan where no one will ever find him. A pause. Merrick's confident smile flickered. That's a warning, Marcus continued. Not a threat. The difference is that warnings give you a chance to walk away. He walked back to his truck without looking back, but he knew it wasn't over. They came at night. Marcus had been expecting it. He'd fortified the cabin, reinforced doors, cleared sight lines, established a safe room in the root cellar for Emma. He'd reached out to 3 other veterans in the area, men who understood what it meant to defend ground against superior forces. They came at 2 a.m., 5 men, tactical gear, night vision, professional but overconfident. They expected a traumatized veteran and a little girl. They got a kill zone. The first man triggered a tripwire and stumbled into a covered pit Marcus had dug that afternoon. The second and third came from the east where Tommy Reeves, former Marine sniper, was waiting with a camera and a comm link. The fourth man made it to the porch. Marcus met him there silent as a ghost and had him in a chokehold before his hand reached his weapon. Your friends are either trapped, lost, or on camera, Marcus said quietly, and in about 3 minutes Sheriff Wade is going to arrive with deputies and a lot of questions. The man struggled. Marcus tightened his grip. Tell Merrick he had his warning. Next time I won't be this gentle. He released the man and melted back into the darkness. Sheriff Wade arrived to find 5 men in tactical gear being held at gunpoint by 3 veterans who had technically broken no laws. Self-defense, Wade said later examining Tommy's footage. Clear as day, but this isn't going to stop them. No, Marcus said. It's going to make them desperate. Desperate men made mistakes, and Marcus was counting on that. He found the final letter 3 days before the trial. It was hidden in a hollow tree behind the stone building. His grandmother's handwriting steady, now written years before the others. Marcus, if you've come this far, you're ready for the truth. I didn't just steal those samples to prove they were drilling on my land. I stole them because I found something they didn't want me to find. In one of the cores, the one marked with a red X, there's a layer of contamination, chemical traces from their drilling operation, the same chemicals that poisoned our well, the same chemicals that killed your grandfather. That sample is proof, not just of theft, of murder. They killed William. They knew the drilling would contaminate the water table. They did it anyway. And then they called me crazy for noticing. Find the marked sample, Marcus. Use it. Make them pay, not for the money. Not even for the land. For your grandfather. For me. For everyone they've ever silenced. Love, Grandma Eleanor. Marcus went back to the stone building that night. He found the marked sample in the third crate from the bottom. A red X, faded but visible, scratched into the metal. He held it in his hand and felt the weight of 50 years of silence. His grandfather, his grandmother, all the families whose wells were poisoned, all the lies that were told to cover it up. This was it, the final piece, the evidence that would bring them all down. He looked up at the mountain, at the stars wheeling overhead, at the cabin where his daughter slept peacefully for the first time in months. "I found it, Grandma," he said quietly. "I found what you hid." The mountain seemed to exhale. The wind moved through the trees like a sigh of relief, and somewhere in the darkness, Marcus heard Sergeant Winnie one final time. The trial would begin in 3 days, and Harrison Whitmore had no idea what was coming. The morning of the trial, Marcus woke to find Sargent standing at the cabin window. The old horse had never come this close to the house before. For weeks he'd kept his distance, watching from the tree line like a guardian who'd completed his mission. But today he stood with his nose pressed against the glass, breath fogging the pain eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made his chest tight. "I know, old man," Marcus said quietly. "Today's the day." Emma was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in the dress Ruth had bought her. It was blue with white flowers, the nicest thing she'd owned in years. She looked small and serious, like a child who'd learned too early that the world wasn't fair. "Daddy, are you scared?" Marcus knelt beside her chair. "A little bit. Are you—" "Ruth says the bad men have lots of lawyers. She says they've never lost." "That's true." "So how do we win?" Marcus thought about his grandmother, about 50 years of patience, about a horse that shouldn't be alive, an evidence that shouldn't exist, and a truth that refused to stay buried. "We tell the truth," he said. "That's all we can do. We tell the truth and hope it's enough." Emma reached out and touched his face with her small hand. "Great-Grandma Eleanor told the truth. Nobody believed her." "I know. But you believe her now." "I do." Emma nodded solemnly. "Then I believe her too. And maybe that's enough people." Marcus pulled his daughter close and held her for a long moment. Outside, Sergeant whinnied softly and turned away, walking back toward the forest with the slow dignity of something that had waited decades for this morning. The courthouse in Asheville was 100 years old, built from mountain stone and stubborn faith in justice. Marcus had seen courthouses in Afghanistan, makeshift tribunals where warlords decided who lived and died, based on tribal allegiance. This felt different, heavier, like the building itself was watching to see what kind of man he was. Victoria Hayes met them at the entrance. She was wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck, her hair pulled back in a way that meant business. "They're going to try to rattle you," she said. "David Chen is the best defense attorney money can buy. He'll attack your credibility, your mental health, your grandmother's sanity. He'll make you angry, and then he'll use that anger against you." "I've been interrogated by the Taliban," Marcus said. "I think I can handle a lawyer." Victoria almost smiled. "Don't underestimate him. The Taliban wanted information. Chen wants to destroy you. There's a difference." The courtroom was packed. Local reporters, national journalists, environmental activists who'd driven from 3 states away. Half the town of Cold Creek filled the gallery, their faces a mixture of hope and fear and resentment. And in the front row behind the defense table sat Harrison Whitmore. Marcus recognized him instantly from his grandmother's photographs. The same face, older now, distinguished by wealth and power, but unmistakably the man who'd laughed at Eleanor Cole 50 years ago. He sat with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never lost anything he couldn't afford to replace. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Whitmore smiled. A small, confident smile that said, "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Marcus didn't smile back. He just held the old man's gaze until Whitmore looked away. First blood. Victoria called Walter Jenkins to the stand first. The retired geologist walked to the witness box with the careful precision of a man who'd spent his life measuring things that mattered. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit, borrowed from someone who attended more funerals than courtrooms. "Mr. Jenkins," Victoria began, "can you tell the court your professional qualifications?" 42 years with the United States Forest Service, specialization in Appalachian geology. I've conducted over 300 mineral surveys in this region. "And have you examined the core samples recovered from the coal property?" "I have." "What did you find?" Walter picked up one of the samples from the evidence table. "This is a geological core sample drilled from approximately 200 feet below the surface. The composition is primarily granite with significant deposits of spodumene." For those of us who aren't geologists, what is spodumene? Lithium ore, high grade. The kind of deposit that's worth billions in today's market. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus watched the jury. 12 ordinary people trying to understand numbers that belonged in science fiction. And the coordinates stamped on these samples, Victoria continued, where do they indicate the drilling took place? Directly beneath land owned by Eleanor Cole, land that Ridgeline Energy never had permission to survey. David Chen stood slowly. Objection. The witness is drawing conclusions about permits he has no expertise to interpret. Your Honor, Victoria said, Mr. Jenkins has testified as an expert witness in 14 federal cases involving mineral rights. His expertise is well established. Overruled. Continue. Walter turned to face the jury directly. I've seen a lot of corporate surveys in my career. I've seen corners cut and regulations bent. But I've never seen anything like this. These samples prove that Ridgeline Energy conducted extensive drilling operations on private property without the owner's knowledge or consent. They found one of the richest lithium deposits on the East Coast and they buried the evidence. Why would they bury it? Victoria asked. If the deposit was so valuable, why not mine it? Because in 1974, lithium was almost worthless. The technology that makes it valuable today, electric vehicles, grid storage. Portable electronics didn't exist. They found a fortune they couldn't spend. Walter paused. So they waited. They watched the price climb for 50 years. They waited for Eleanor Cole to die, and they planned to acquire the land legally before anyone knew what was underneath it. Marcus watched Harrison Whitmore during this testimony. The old man's face remained carefully neutral, but his hands were gripped together in his lap so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He was scared. Good. David Chen's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Jenkins, you testified that you've conducted over 300 mineral surveys. Is that correct? Yes. And in how many of those surveys were you involved in determining land ownership or permit validity? Walter hesitated. That wasn't my specific role. So you're not an expert in property law? No. Or corporate permitting procedures? No. Then how can you testify that these samples prove illegal drilling? Because the coordinates prove where the samples were taken, nothing more. Chen picked up one of the cores. These stamps could have been altered. The samples could have been moved. There's no chain of custody documentation. For all we know, Eleanor Cole fabricated this evidence herself. Objection? Victoria was on her feet. Withdrawn. Chen smiled pleasantly. No further questions. Walter stepped down, looking shaken. Marcus caught his eye and nodded. It's okay. This is just the beginning. The afternoon session began with Frank Mercer. The retired drill operator walked to the stand like a man approaching his own execution. He was sober, cleaned up, wearing a suit that hung on his thin frame like a reminder of the man he used to be. Mr. Mercer, Victoria said gently, can you tell the court about your employment with Ridgeline Energy? I worked for them from 1972 to 1978, started as a roughneck on the drilling crews. By 74, I was keeping records for the survey teams. What kind of records? Frank pulled out the ledger. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady. Every drill site, every sample, every depth reading. It was my job to document everything. And did you document the drilling operations that took place on Eleanor Cole's property? Yes, ma'am, I did. Can you describe what happened? Frank closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. Mrs. Cole was the cook at our survey camp. Nicest lady you'd ever meet. Made biscuits that tasted like heaven. She had no idea we were drilling on her land. How do you know she didn't know? Because I heard Harrison Whitmore laugh about it. Told us she was a poor widow who couldn't afford a lawyer. Said we could take whatever we wanted and she'd never know the difference. Marcus watched the jury. Several of them had turned to look at Whitmore. The old man's face was stone, but a vein was pulsing in his temple. Did you ever consider telling Mrs. Cole the truth? Victoria asked. Frank's voice cracked. Every day for 50 years, but I was young and scared, and Whitmore promised me a promotion if I kept quiet. He wiped his eyes. He lied about that too. Used me up and threw me away like everyone else. Why are you coming forward now? Frank looked directly at Marcus. Because that woman spent her whole life trying to make people believe her. She died alone, called crazy by everyone, including her own family. And I could have stopped it. I could have told the truth 50 years ago. His voice broke completely. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. The courtroom was silent. Even David Chen seemed momentarily at a loss. Victoria let the moment breathe. Then quietly, no further questions. Chen's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Mercer, how long have you been an alcoholic? Frank flinched. 30 years, give or take. And during those 30 years, have you experienced memory problems, blackouts, confusion about past events? Sometimes, but I remember this. I remember all of it. You remember events from 50 years ago clearly despite decades of alcohol abuse. Some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Chen picked up the ledger. This document you've presented, you claim it's authentic, but it's been in your possession for 50 years, in a trailer, with no climate control, no security, no verification. It's real. You say that, but how can the court verify it? How can we know you didn't fabricate this ledger to support your own claims, to get attention, to assuage your guilt? Frank's face reddened. I'm not lying. Mr. Mercer, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Silence. Mr. Mercer, DUI 3 times, and a fraud charge in 1992. Fraud? Chen let the word hang in the air. So you have a documented history of dishonesty, of legal troubles, of substance abuse, and you expect this jury to believe your testimony about events that allegedly occurred half a century ago? Frank was shaking now. I'm telling the truth. I swear on my mother's grave. No further questions. Frank stepped down, looking destroyed. Marcus met him at the gallery rail. I'm sorry, Frank whispered. I messed it up. You told the truth, Marcus said. That's all my grandmother ever wanted. That's enough. But watching the jury's faces, Marcus wasn't sure it was. Day 2 began with character witnesses. Ruth Adkins testified about Eleanor Cole's decades of research, the careful documentation, the monthly visits to request records, the absolute certainty that never wavered. She wasn't crazy, Ruth said firmly. She was the most sane person I've ever known. She just knew something no one else was willing to believe. Other witnesses followed. Families whose wells had been contaminated in the 1970s. Children who remembered their parents complaining about water that tasted like metal. Grandchildren who'd inherited health problems no one could explain. A pattern emerged. 17 families. 17 contaminated wells. All within a 5-mile radius of Ridgeline's drilling operations. And at the center of it all, Harrison Whitmore, the site manager who'd dismissed every complaint, who'd called Eleanor Cole crazy, who'd built a career on silence and secrets. By the afternoon, the momentum had shifted. Victoria called her final witness. The plaintiff calls Marcus Cole. Marcus stood slowly. His leg was aching from sitting too long. His hands wanted to shake, but he wouldn't let them. He'd faced worse than lawyers. He'd faced death in a dozen different forms across 3 continents. This was just another battlefield. He took the oath and settled into the witness chair. The wood was worn smooth from generations of testimony. He wondered how many lies had been told from this seat, how many truths. Mr. Cole, Victoria began, can you tell the court about your military service? 12 years in the Army, Special Forces, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, and you were honorably discharged. Medical discharge. IED took a piece of my leg outside Kandahar. What happened after your discharge? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Everything fell apart. My wife left. I couldn't hold a job. The VA benefits got tied up in paperwork. He paused. We were homeless for 6 weeks before my grandmother's letter found me. What letter? The one that told me I'd inherited her property, a cabin in the mountains that I hadn't seen in 15 years. Why hadn't you visited in so long? Marcus felt the weight of the question, the weight of all the years he'd stayed away. Because I believed what everyone else believed, that my grandmother was paranoid, bitter, chasing conspiracies that didn't exist. His voice caught. I was ashamed of her, so I stayed away, and she died alone. Victoria let the silence stretch. What changed? I found what she'd hidden. The samples, the letters, the evidence she'd gathered over 50 years. Marcus looked at the jury. My grandmother wasn't crazy. She was the only person who knew the truth, and she spent her entire life waiting for someone to believe her. What is that truth, Mr. Cole? Marcus took a deep breath. Ridgeline Energy drilled illegally on my family's land. They found billions of dollars worth of lithium. They buried the evidence and waited for my grandmother to die. And when she confronted them, they called her crazy. They destroyed her reputation. They took everything from her except her faith that someday someone would find what she'd hidden. He turned to look at Harrison Whitmore. That man laughed at my grandmother. Told her she was a poor widow who couldn't afford a lawyer. He thought she'd give up. He thought she'd disappear. Marcus's voice hardened. He was wrong. David Chen's cross-examination began with false sympathy. Mr. Cole, I want to thank you for your service to our country. What you endured in Afghanistan was truly heroic. Don't. Chen paused. I'm sorry. Don't pretend to respect my service while you're trying to destroy my family. Ask your questions. The lawyer's pleasant mask slipped for a moment. Then it was back. Very well. Mr. Cole, you testified that you hadn't visited your grandmother in 15 years. Is that correct? Yes. And during those 15 years, did you ever speak with her on the phone? Not often. How often? Maybe once a year, sometimes less. So you had virtually no relationship with Eleanor Cole for the last decade and a half of her life, and yet you expect this jury to believe you understand her mental state, her motivations, her claims. I understand the evidence. Evidence you found after she died. Evidence that conveniently supports a billion-dollar lawsuit. Evidence that could have been fabricated by a lonely old woman who'd lost touch with reality. Marcus felt the anger rising. He pushed it down. My grandmother wasn't crazy. How would you know you weren't there? Chen leaned forward. Mr. Cole, you testified that you suffered from PTSD after your discharge. Have you ever experienced hallucinations? No. Memory problems, confusion, paranoid thoughts. Victoria stood. Objection. Counsel is attempting to use the plaintiff's military service against him. I'm establishing the witness's reliability, Your Honor. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Cole. Marcus met Chen's eyes directly. I have PTSD. I have nightmares. I have days when the world doesn't feel real, but I know the difference between what's in my head and what's in my hand. Those samples are real. That ledger is real. And your client's guilt is real. That's for the jury to decide. Yes, it is. Chen smiled thinly. No further questions. The court recessed for lunch. Marcus sat alone in a small conference room staring at his hands. They were shaking now. He'd held them steady through the testimony, but the adrenaline was wearing off. Dad, Emma was standing in the doorway. Ruth had brought her from the hotel cleaned up and worried. Hey baby, you okay? Ruth said the mean lawyer was asking you hard questions. He was. Did you answer them good? Marcus held out his arms and Emma ran to him. He pulled her onto his lap and held her close. I told the truth. That's all I could do. Great-Grandma Eleanor told the truth too. Nobody believed her. I know. Emma pulled back to look at his face. But she was still right. Even when nobody believed her, she was still right. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. His daughter, 8 years old, already understanding things that had taken him 40 years to learn. Yeah, baby, she was still right. Then we're still right too, even if the jury doesn't believe us. He held her tighter. Yeah, we are. The afternoon session changed everything. Victoria stood before the jury with a single piece of paper. Your Honor, the plaintiff wishes to submit additional evidence. A document we received this morning from an anonymous source. Chen was on his feet immediately. Objection. We haven't had time to review any new evidence. This is highly irregular. Your Honor, this document is directly relevant to the testimony we've heard today. The defense will have ample opportunity to challenge its authenticity. The judge considered for a moment. I'll allow it. Proceed. Victoria turned to the jury. This is a memorandum dated March 15, 1974. It was written by Harrison Whitmore to the Executive Board of Ridgeline Energy. I'll read the relevant section. She cleared her throat. The coal property survey has confirmed deposits exceeding our most optimistic projections. However, the landowner has become suspicious of our activities. Recommend we accelerate extraction of core samples before she can secure legal representation. Her husband's declining health may provide a convenient explanation for any complications. The courtroom exploded. Marcus stared at the paper in Victoria's hand. His grandfather's declining health. A convenient explanation for complications. They knew the drilling was poisoning the water. They knew his grandfather was sick because of them. And they did it anyway. Harrison Whitmore was on his feet, his face purple with rage. That document is a forgery. I never wrote that. Someone fabricated it. Chen grabbed his client's arm. Harrison, sit down. Sit down. I will not sit down. This is a conspiracy. They're trying to frame me. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Mr. Whitmore, you will sit down immediately or you will be removed. Whitmore was shaking. His careful composure had shattered completely. 50 years, he hissed. 50 years I've waited for this to be over. That woman should have given up. She should have died quietly like everyone else. The courtroom went dead silent. Chen closed his eyes. Marcus stood slowly. Say that again. Whitmore turned to look at him, and in that moment all the masks fell away. The distinguished executive, the successful businessman, the pillar of the community. What remained was a man who had built his entire life on the suffering of others. Your grandmother was a nuisance, Whitmore said coldly. A poor widow who didn't know her place. We offered her money. We offered her a chance to walk away. She refused. Everything that happened after that was her own fault. Including my grandfather's death, Whitmore smiled. A terrible, empty smile. Your grandfather was a casualty of progress, just like all the others, just like your grandmother will be remembered as a crazy old woman who couldn't let go. Marcus moved before anyone could stop him. He crossed the courtroom in 3 strides, grabbed Whitmore by the collar, and lifted him off his feet. Security guards shouted. Emma screamed. The judge was banging his gavel so hard it sounded like gunfire. But Marcus only had eyes for the man in front of him. My grandmother spent 50 years waiting for justice, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She died alone because of you. My grandfather was murdered because of you. And you think you can stand there and smile about it? Marcus, Victoria's voice sharp and urgent. Marcus, let him go. You're giving them exactly what they want. Whitmore was gasping, his face turning red. You see, he choked out, violent, unstable, just like his grandmother. Marcus felt the rage burning through him, the rage of a man who'd lost everything, the rage of a soldier who'd seen too much death, the rage of a grandson who'd finally understood why his grandmother had never stopped fighting. And then he felt something else. Emma's hand, small and warm, slipping into his. Daddy, please. Marcus looked down at his daughter, at her terrified eyes, at the tears running down her cheeks, and he let go. Whitmore stumbled backward, gasping. Chen caught him before he fell. I apologize to the court, Marcus said, his voice steady now, but I do not apologize to that man. What he did to my family is unforgivable, and he knows it. The judge called a recess. Marcus was escorted from the courtroom by 2 bailiffs. Victoria followed, her face a mixture of anger and grudging respect. That was incredibly stupid, she said. I know. You could have cost us the case. I know. But that confession from Whitmore, Victoria shook her head. That might be worth more than any evidence we've presented. He just admitted in open court that he knew about the contamination, that he considered your grandfather's death a casualty of progress. Marcus sat down heavily on a bench in the hallway. His hands were shaking again. He killed them. He killed all of them, and he's been getting away with it for 50 years. Victoria sat beside him. Not anymore. Whatever happens with this lawsuit, that man's reputation is destroyed. He just confessed to corporate murder in front of 50 witnesses and a court reporter. What about the case? The judge will probably sanction you for the physical confrontation, but I don't think it'll affect the verdict. She paused. That memorandum changes everything. If it's authentic, it proves Ridgeline knew their operations were causing harm and continued anyway. That's not just negligence, that's deliberate corporate malfeasance. Who sent it? Anonymous, but someone inside Apex finally grew a conscience. Victoria stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow is closing arguments, and I think we're going to win. That night, Marcus sat alone in the hotel room while Emma slept. He was holding his grandmother's final letter, the one about his grandfather, about the water that tasted like metal, about a man who died believing he was losing his mind. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I stayed away. I'm sorry you had to carry this alone. The letter didn't answer. Letters never did. But somewhere in the silence, Marcus felt something shift. A weight he'd been carrying since Afghanistan. A weight that had nothing to do with the war. Guilt. For abandoning the people who needed him. For believing lies because they were easier than truth. For being so lost in his own pain that he couldn't see anyone else's. His grandmother had been fighting a war for 50 years, and he'd been too broken to notice. I'm going to finish it, he said. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm going to finish what you started. I promise. Outside the window, the mountains were dark against the stars. The same mountains his grandmother had watched every night for 50 years. The same mountains that held secrets and bones and truths that refused to stay buried. Marcus closed his eyes. Tomorrow the jury would decide. But whatever they decided, Harrison Whitmore had already lost. The truth was out. The confession was on record. The world knew what Ridgeline had done. And Eleanor Cole, the crazy old woman who never stopped fighting, had finally been heard. In the morning, they would learn if justice had a verdict. But Marcus already knew the answer. His grandmother had won the day she decided to keep fighting. The day she stole those samples and hid them in the mountain. The day she wrote her letters and trusted that someday someone would find them. Victory wasn't about money or courts or juries. Victory was about truth. And the truth was finally free. The jury filed back into the courtroom at 9:47 a.m. Marcus counted them as they entered. 12 faces he'd studied for 3 days. The retired teacher who took notes constantly. The mechanic who chewed his thumbnail when testimony got intense. The young mother who kept glancing at Emma with something like pity. The older man in the back row who hadn't shown any emotion at all. 12 strangers who held his grandmother's legacy in their hands. Emma gripped his arm. "Daddy, I can't breathe." "Yes, you can. Slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth." "What if they say no?" Marcus didn't answer. He'd been asking himself the same question all night. Victoria sat motionless beside him, hands folded on the table. She'd told him the waiting was the worst part. That even after 20 years of trials, she never got used to these final moments before a verdict. Harrison Whitmore sat across the aisle flanked by his lawyers. He looked older today, smaller. The confrontation yesterday had cracked something in him that expensive suits and confident smiles couldn't hide. But he was still here, still fighting, still refusing to admit what he'd done. The judge enters, everyone rose. "Be seated. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" The retired teacher stood. Her hands were trembling slightly as she held the paper. "We have your honor. On the count of illegal surveying and mineral extraction, how does the jury find?" "We find the defendant liable." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus felt Emma's grip tighten on his arm. "On the count of fraudulent concealment of evidence, how does the jury find?" "We find the defendant liable." Victoria exhaled slowly. Chen's face had gone pale. "On the count of negligent contamination of water sources resulting in bodily harm, how does the jury find?" "We find the defendant liable." Now the murmurs were becoming a roar. The judge banged his gavel. "On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, how does the jury find?" "We find the defendant liable. And regarding damages, what sum has the jury determined?" The foreperson's voice was clear and strong. "We award the plaintiff $847 million in compensatory and punitive damages." The courtroom erupted. Emma screamed and threw her arms around Marcus's neck. Victoria was on her feet, hand pressed to her mouth. Ruth was crying in the gallery. Frank Mercer had his face buried in his hands. And Harrison Whitmore was staring at the jury like they'd just pronounced his death sentence. Because in a way they had. Marcus sat frozen in his chair. $847 million. A number so large it didn't seem real. A number that could change everything. But all he could think about was his grandmother, sitting in that cabin, watching the mountain, waiting for someone to believe her. "We did it, Grandma," he whispered betrothed. "We did it." The celebration lasted 3 hours. Victoria took them to a restaurant in downtown Asheville, the kind of place Marcus never would have entered on his own. Ruth came. Walter came. Frank came, still shaking, still crying, but smiling for the first time in years. Emma ate chocolate cake and asked questions about what $847 million looked like. "It's just numbers, baby," Marcus told her. "Numbers in a bank account. But we're rich now. We're secure, that's different." What's secure mean? Marcus thought about it. It means we never have to sleep in the truck again. It means you get to go to school and have friends and not worry about where your next meal's coming from. And Great-Grandma Eleanor's house, we get to keep it. We get to keep it. We get to fix it up, make it the home she always wanted it to be. Emma nodded solemnly. "I think she'd like that." "I think she would too." Victoria pulled Marcus aside as the celebration wound down. Her professional mask had slipped, revealing something warmer underneath. "You know this isn't over," she said quietly. "What do you mean? Haggerby Apex will appeal. They'll tie this up in courts for years. The money won't come quickly." "I know." "And Whitmore?" Victoria paused. "He's not the kind of man who accepts defeat. What happened in that courtroom today, that memorandum, his confession that destroyed more than his company, it destroyed his reputation, his legacy, everything he spent 50 years building." "Good. I'm serious, Marcus. Men like Whitmore don't go quietly. They get desperate. They get dangerous. She met his eyes. Watch your back. Watch Emma. This victory made you a target. Marcus nodded slowly. He'd been a target before. In Afghanistan, in the mountains, in places where death waited behind every rock and shadow. He knew how to survive. But Emma didn't, and that scared him more than anything. The call came at 2 a.m. Marcus was asleep in the hotel room when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello? Mr. Cole. A woman's voice. Familiar somehow, but he couldn't place it. I need to speak with you. It's 2 a.m. I know, I'm sorry, but this can't wait. Who is this? A pause. My name is Sarah Whitmore. Harrison Whitmore is my grandfather. Marcus sat up slowly. His hand moved automatically toward the nightstand drawer where he'd started keeping a knife. What do you want to help you? Why would Harrison Whitmore's granddaughter want to help me? Because I'm the one who sent you that memorandum. Silence. Marcus's mind raced. You're the anonymous source. Yes, and I have more, much more. Things my grandfather has been hiding for decades. Things about other families, other properties, other... She hesitated. Other deaths. Why are you telling me this? Because my grandfather is dying. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And I don't want to inherit his sins. Her voice cracked. I've known the truth since I was 16. I found documents in his study, letters, photographs, evidence of things that... She couldn't finish. Marcus thought about his grandmother, about 50 years of being called crazy, about dying alone because no one believed her. Meet me tomorrow, he said. Bring everything you have. Where? The cabin. My grandmother's cabin. I think it's time the truth came home. Sarah Whitmore arrived at noon. She drove a car that cost more than Marcus's annual disability check, but she looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles under her eyes, hands that trembled when she carried the box from her trunk. Emma watched from the window. Marcus had told her to stay inside until he was sure it was safe. Thank you for meeting with me, Sarah said. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what my family did to yours. You're not your grandfather. I've spent my whole life benefiting from what he stole. That makes me complicit. Marcus studied her face. She had Whitmore's eyes, but something softer in them. Something that looked like genuine remorse. What's in the box? Sarah set it on the cabin porch. 50 years of secrets. Every family my grandfather's company exploited. Every property they surveyed illegally. Every complaint they buried. Every death they covered up. Marcus opened the box. Files. Dozens of them. Each one labeled with a family name and a date. How many? He asked quietly. 47 families. Across 5 states. All with the same story. Contaminated wells. Unexplained illnesses. Land that was worth more than anyone told them. Sarah's voice broke. My grandfather built an empire on their suffering, and I've been living in that empire my whole life pretending I didn't know. Why come forward now? Because of you. Because of what you did in that courtroom. Sarah met his eyes. You could have taken the settlement. $50 million to walk away, but you didn't. You fought for the truth even when it would have been easier to give up. That was my grandmother's fight. I just finished it. No, Sarah shook her head. You started something new, something bigger. These other families, they deserve what you gave Eleanor Cole. They deserve to know they weren't crazy. They deserve justice. Marcus looked at the files. 47 families. 47 chances to do what his grandmother had spent her life trying to do. This is going to take years, he said. I know. It's going to make powerful enemies. I know. Why do you want to help? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Because my grandfather is going to die soon. And when he does, I don't want to be the person he raised me to be. I want to be something better. She paused. I want to be the person who told the truth, even when it cost everything. Marcus thought about his grandmother, about the choice she'd made 50 years ago, to steal those samples, to hide the evidence, to wait alone for someone to believe her. All right, he said. Let's get started. The weeks that followed were a blur. Victoria filed additional lawsuits on behalf of 17 families whose cases were strong enough to move forward immediately. The others required more investigation, more evidence, more work. Ruth became the unofficial historian of the operation, organizing documents and tracking down survivors. Walter provided geological expertise analyzing samples and confirming patterns of contamination. Frank Mercer found new purpose. He traveled from town to town, meeting with families who'd been dismissed as paranoid, telling them they weren't alone. His ledger became a roadmap to 50 years of corporate crime. And Sarah Whitmore became the most unlikely ally of all. She opened doors that money couldn't buy, provided insider knowledge that no investigation could have uncovered, and faced her own family's fury with a courage Marcus hadn't expected. Harrison Whitmore called her twice. The first time, he screamed at her for 20 minutes. The second time, he offered her $5 million to stop. She refused both calls. "He's not my grandfather anymore," she told Marcus. "He died the day I learned what he really was. The man in that hospital bed is just a stranger wearing his face." The media called it the Appalachian Reckoning. Stories spread across the country. Families who'd been silent for decades found their voices. Environmental groups rallied to the cause. Politicians who'd ignored rural communities suddenly discovered their concern. Marcus gave interviews reluctantly. He hated the cameras, the questions, the way reporters wanted to make him a hero when all he'd done was finish what his grandmother started. "Tell me about Eleanor Cole," they'd ask, and he'd tell them about the biscuits she made, about the horse she loved, about the mountain she watched every night waiting for someone to believe her. "She wasn't crazy," he'd say. "She was patient, she was brave, she was the most stubborn person I've ever known, and she was right." Emma became something of a celebrity at school. The other children wanted to hear about the trial, about the money, about the great-grandmother who'd hidden treasure in the mountain. She told them the truth. Great-grandma Eleanor wasn't hiding treasure, she was hiding proof. Because bad men took something that didn't belong to them, and she spent her whole life trying to make them give it back. Did she get it back? "She died before she could, but my daddy finished it for her. That's what family does. We finish each other's fights." The first settlement came through in October. Not from the main case that was still working its way through appeals, but from one of the additional lawsuits. A family in West Virginia whose property had been surveyed in 1976. Their wells had been poisoned just like the Coles. Their father had died of unexplained illness, just like Marcus's grandfather. Apex settled for $43 million rather than face another public trial. Then another settlement, and another. Each one larger than the last as Apex's board realized the full extent of their exposure. By December 7, families had received compensation. 5 more lawsuits were pending. The total payouts exceeded $300 million, and Harrison Whitmore was dying. Sarah called with the news on a cold Tuesday morning. "He's in hospice now, days, maybe hours." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He'd thought about this day. Wondered how he'd feel when the man who'd destroyed his family finally faced his own mortality. He expected satisfaction, triumph, justice served. Instead, he felt nothing. Just a hollow emptiness where rage used to live. "Does he know?" Marcus asked. "About the settlements? About what's happening to his company?" "He knows everything. It's killing him faster than the cancer." Sarah's voice was flat. "His last words to me were that I'd destroyed his legacy, that everything he built was gone because of my betrayal. I'm sorry." "Don't be. His legacy was built on suffering. It deserved to be destroyed." She paused. "He's asking to see you." "What?" "He wants to talk, before the end. He says he has something to tell you. Something about your grandmother." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. What could he possibly say that matters now? "I don't know, but he's been asking for 3 days. He won't die until he tells you." "Good. Let him wait." "Marcus," Sarah's voice softened, "I know you hate him. You have every right. But this might be your last chance to understand what really happened. Your last chance for answers." Marcus thought about his grandmother's letters, about all the questions she'd never been able to answer, about the secrets that had died with her. Where is he? The hospice was quiet. Marcus walked down the hallway alone, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum. He'd left Emma with Ruth. She didn't need to see this. Didn't need to be in the same room with the man who'd destroyed her family. Harrison Whitmore's room was at the end of the corridor. A nurse stood outside, clipboard in hand. "He's been waiting for you," she said. "He's weak but lucid. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Marcus nodded and pushed open the door. The man in the bed barely resembled the Harrison Whitmore he'd confronted in the courtroom. The cancer had eaten him from the inside out, leaving behind a skeleton wrapped in papery skin. His eyes were the only thing unchanged, still sharp, still calculating, still burning with the cold intelligence that had built an empire on stolen land. "Cole." Whitmore's voice was a whisper, but the hatred in it was strong as ever. "You came." Sarah said you had something to tell me. I do. Whitmore coughed a wet, rattling sound. About your grandmother, about the truth. You don't know anything about truth. I know more than you think. Whitmore's lips twisted into something like a smile. I know what really happened in 1974. What really happened to your grandfather. What your grandmother really found. Marcus stepped closer to the bed. Then tell me. She didn't just find the lithium coal. She found the bodies. The words hung in the air like poison. What bodies? 3 workers, drilling crew. They discovered the contamination before we could cover it up, threatened to go to the authorities. Whitmore's breath was coming in short gasps now. Whitmore Industries made them disappear, buried them in the mountain. Your grandmother found the graves when she was stealing those samples. Marcus felt the room tilt. You're lying. I'm dying. What reason do I have to lie? Whitmore laughed, a terrible sound like broken glass. She knew Cole. Your grandmother knew about the murders. That's why she hid for 50 years. Not just because of the lithium, because she was afraid. Afraid of what? Of ending up like them. Of ending up buried in the mountain with men who asked too many questions. Marcus's hands were shaking. His grandmother had never mentioned bodies, never mentioned murders. But the fear in her letters, the warnings about being careful, suddenly made terrible sense. Where are they buried? Whitmore smiled. Now that's the question, isn't it? The only question that matters. Because those bodies are proof of more than just mineral theft. They're proof of murder, first-degree murder, and the statute of limitations never runs out on murder. Where are they? I'll tell you. Whitmore's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. But not for free. I want something in return. You're not in a position to bargain? I'm always in a position to bargain. Whitmore coughed again, blood flecking his lips. I want your word that you'll destroy those files Sarah gave you. I want the other lawsuits dropped. I want my name cleared after I'm gone. Marcus stared at the dying man. At the monster who had stolen his grandfather's life, his grandmother's sanity, and God knew how many others. No, Whitmore's face contorted with rage. Then those bodies stay buried, and you never prove what really happened. I don't need to prove it. Marcus leaned closer. You just confessed to murder, to covering up 3 deaths, and I'm recording every word. He pulled out his phone, showing the screen. Recording active. Whitmore's face went gray. You can't use that. It's not admissible. Maybe not in court, but it's admissible in the press, in the history books, in the memory of every family you destroyed. Marcus smiled coldly. You wanted to negotiate. Here's my counteroffer. Tell me where the bodies are buried, or I release this recording to every news outlet in the country. Your children will know what you did. Your grandchildren will know. Your name will be synonymous with murder for the rest of human history. You wouldn't. I'm a Special Forces soldier who was homeless 6 months ago. I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Try me. Silence stretched between them. Whitmore's labored breathing was the only sound. The old quarry, he finally whispered. 1/2 mile north of your grandmother's cabin. There's a collapsed mine shaft. We dropped them down and sealed it with concrete. Is that everything? Everything. Whitmore's voice was fading. She won, Cole. Your crazy grandmother, she won. I hope that makes you happy. It doesn't make me happy. It makes me sad. Sad that you wasted your whole life being a monster when you could have been something better. Marcus stood. Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore. I hope you find the peace in death that you denied to everyone you hurt in life. He walked out without looking back. Harrison Whitmore died 3 hours later. The nurse said he went screaming, calling out names no one recognized. Marcus hoped the men from the mine shaft were waiting for him on the other side. The excavation took 2 weeks. Marcus worked alongside the forensic team, watching as they carefully removed 50 years of concrete and debris from the collapsed mine shaft. Sheriff Wade had called in state investigators. The FBI had gotten involved. Sarah Whitmore had provided additional documentation confirming her grandfather's confession. On the 14th day, they found them. 3 skeletons. Male. Ages estimated between 30 and 45. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Workers who'd discovered the contamination and tried to do the right thing. Workers who'd been murdered for asking questions. Workers whose families had spent 50 years wondering what happened to their loved ones. Marcus thought about his grandmother. About the weight she'd carried. About the fear that must have consumed her when she found these graves. She'd known. All those years she'd known about the murders, and she'd stayed silent not because she was crazy, but because she was terrified. Terrified that if she told anyone she'd end up in the ground beside them. "Mr. Cole." One of the FBI agents was approaching, a woman in her 40s with a kind face and tired eyes. "We've identified one of the victims, James Peterson, age 37. He was reported missing in 1974. His daughter is still alive. She's been looking for him for 50 years. Marcus closed his eyes. Another family, another grandmother who'd been called crazy for believing something terrible had happened. "Does she know?" "We're sending someone to tell her now. She wanted me to thank you. She said she always knew her father didn't just disappear. She knew something was wrong." "Tell her?" Marcus's voice caught. "Tell her I understand. Tell her my grandmother knew the feeling." The agent nodded and walked away. Marcus stood alone at the edge of the excavation, watching the forensic team carefully remove the remains. 3 men who'd tried to do the right thing. 3 men who'd been silenced for 50 years. But not anymore. The truth was finally free. All of it. That night, Marcus returned to the cabin. Emma was asleep in the newly repaired bedroom tucked under the quilt that had belonged to his grandmother. Ruth had gone home. The house was quiet. He walked outside and found Sargent standing in the yard, silver coat gleaming in the moonlight. "Hey, old man, how are you still alive?" The horse nickered softly and pressed his nose against Marcus's chest. She knew about the bodies, didn't she? That's what she was really hiding. Not just the lithium, not just the theft, the murders. Sargent was silent, but his eyes held something ancient and knowing. She must have been so scared, all those years, knowing what she'd found, knowing they might come for her too. Marcus felt tears running down his face. She was braver than any soldier I ever met. She fought a war for 50 years all alone, and she never gave up. He wrapped his arms around the old horse's neck and wept. For his grandmother, for his grandfather, for the families who'd suffered in silence, for the workers buried in the mountain, for the 50 years of lies and fear and pain, and for himself, for the man he'd been too broken to help, too lost to believe. But he believed now. He believed in truth, in justice, in the stubborn, patient power of people who refused to be silenced. His grandmother had taught him that, across the distance of death, through letters and samples and an impossible horse. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered into Sargent's mane. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for waiting for me." The mountain stood silent and steady around them. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, Marcus felt something shift. The weight he'd carried since Afghanistan, since his divorce, since his breakdown, since the day he'd realized he had nothing left. That weight finally began to lift. Not because he was rich now, not because he'd won the lawsuit, but because he'd found something worth fighting for, something bigger than his own pain, his grandmother's truth, and now it would live forever. 6 months after the verdict, the first check arrived. Marcus stood at the mailbox holding an envelope that contained more money than his grandmother had seen in her entire lifetime. His hands weren't shaking anymore. He'd gotten used to that. What he hadn't gotten used to was the weight of responsibility that came with it. "Daddy, what's that?" Emma was walking up the newly paved driveway home from school with a backpack full of books and a smile that hadn't left her face in months. "The settlement money, first installment." "How much?" Marcus showed her the number. Emma's eyes went wide. "That's a lot of zeros." "It is." "What are we going to do with it?" Marcus looked at the cabin behind them. New roof, new windows, fresh paint on the trim. It looked like a home now, not a memory of neglect. "We're going to do what your great-grandmother would have wanted. We're going to help people." The Eleanor Cole Foundation launched 2 weeks later. Victoria had helped with the paperwork. Ruth had designed the mission statement. Walter had contributed his expertise on mineral rights and environmental protection. Frank had insisted on being involved, saying he owed it to the woman he'd failed for 50 years. And Sarah Whitmore had written the first check. $10 million from her personal trust fund given without conditions or expectations. "It's blood money," she'd told Marcus. "Everything I have comes from what my grandfather stole. The least I can do is give it back." The Foundation's first case came from West Virginia. A family named Turner, whose land had been surveyed by Ridgeline in 1975. Their wells had gone bad 6 months after the drilling stopped. 3 family members had died of unexplained illness. Marcus drove out to meet them on a cold February morning. Helen Turner was 83 years old. She'd been fighting for answers since she was 34. 49 years of letters to the county. 49 years of being dismissed as paranoid. 49 years of watching her family's health deteriorate while the company that poisoned them got richer. They told me I was crazy, Helen said, gripping Marcus's hands with surprising strength. They said the water was fine. They said my husband's cancer was bad luck. They said my daughter's birth defects were genetic. They lied. I know they lied. I've always known. Tears streamed down her weathered face. But nobody believed me. For 49 years, nobody believed me. I believe you, Mrs. Turner, and I'm going to prove it. The lawsuit was filed in March. By April, Apex had offered a settlement, $37 million. Helen Turner accepted, not because of the money, but because the settlement included a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a written apology, a permanent record that she'd been right all along. My husband's name is cleared, she told Marcus at the settlement conference. My daughter's suffering is acknowledged. That's worth more than any amount of money. I understand? No, Ek. Helen shook her head. You really do understand. That's what makes you different. You know what it's like to be called crazy for telling the truth. Marcus thought about his grandmother, about 50 years of patience, about a horse that should have been dead and evidence that refused to disappear. I learned from the best, he said. The cases multiplied. By June, the foundation had taken on 12 families. By September, 34. By the one-year anniversary of the original verdict, they'd recovered over $700 million for families across 5 states. Marcus hired a staff, lawyers, investigators, geologists, social workers who helped families navigate the emotional aftermath of vindication. Ruth became the foundation's unofficial historian, documenting every case, every victory, every family that finally got to hear the words, "You were right, we believe you." Frank Mercer traveled constantly speaking to community groups about corporate accountability. He'd been sober for 14 months now. The guilt that had eaten him alive for 50 years was slowly transforming into purpose. I can't undo what I did, he told Marcus one evening, but maybe I can help undo what they did. Maybe that's enough. It's enough, Frank. It's more than enough. Walter Jenkins published a paper on the geological evidence of systematic contamination. It was cited in 17 EPA investigations and 3 congressional hearings. The Appalachian Reckoning had become a case study in corporate environmental crime, and Victoria Hayes was nominated for the American Bar Association's Public Service Award. She accepted it wearing a pin that said, "Justice delayed is not justice denied." Emma turned 9 in October. Marcus threw her a party at the cabin. Not a fancy party with caterers and decorations, but a real party with homemade cake and friends from school and presents wrapped in newspaper. Sargent stood at the edge of the yard watching the children play with the patient wisdom of something that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "Daddy?" Emma found him standing alone by the old horse watching the celebration from a distance. "Yeah, baby." "Are you happy?" Marcus considered the question. Happiness had always felt like something that happened to other people, something he'd lost in Afghanistan and never expected to find again. "I'm getting there," he said honestly. "It takes time." "Ruth says you're a hero. She says you saved lots of families." "Ruth is too kind. She says Great-Grandma Eleanor would be proud of you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "You think so? I know so." Emma slipped her hand into his. "Because you believed her, even when nobody else did. You believed her, and you made everybody else believe her too. She made me believe her, with her letters, her evidence, her stubborn refusal to give up." "That sounds like you," Emma said. "Ruth says you're stubborn too." Marcus laughed. The sound surprised him. He hadn't laughed much since before the war, since before everything fell apart. "I guess stubbornness runs in the family." "I'm stubborn too," Emma said proudly. "So we're all the same, you and me and Great-Grandma Eleanor." Marcus pulled his daughter close. "Yeah, baby, we're all the same." "Betil." The phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. Marcus was awake instantly, hand reaching for the knife he still kept by the bed. Old habits, the kind you didn't unlearn even when the war was over. "Hello, Mr. Cole?" A woman's voice, familiar. "Sheriff Wade." "I need you to come to the hospital. It's about Frank Mercer." Marcus's blood went cold. "What happened?" "Someone ran him off the road? He's alive, but barely. And Marcus?" Wade's voice cracked. "He's asking for you. He says he has something to tell you, something important." Marcus was dressed and out the door in 3 minutes. Ruth arrived to stay with Emma. No questions asked. She'd learned not to ask questions when Marcus moved like that. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Marcus made it in 12. Frank was in the ICU, more tubes than man-face, swollen and purple from the crash. His eyes fluttered open when Marcus entered the room. Cole. His voice was barely a whisper. Knew you'd come. What happened, Frank? Black SUV, no plates, forced me off the mountain road. Frank coughed blood, flecking his lips. They're not done, Cole. Apex might be dying, but the people who built it are still out there, still angry, still dangerous. Who did this? Don't know, but I know why. Frank's hand found Marcus's arm gripping with surprising strength. They're scared. The Foundation is exposing too much, too many families, too many crimes. Someone decided to send a message. By killing you, by trying to. Frank managed something like a smile. Takes more than a car accident to kill an old drunk like me. Frank, I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't asked you to travel to speak... Stop. Frank's grip tightened. This isn't your fault. This is their fault. The men who've been getting away with murder for 50 years. They're scared now, Cole. That's a good thing. Scared men make mistakes. Scared men also kill people. Then you'd better be careful, because you're next on their list. Marcus stared at the man in the hospital bed. The man who'd carried guilt for 50 years. The man who'd finally found redemption by telling the truth. I'm not going to stop, Marcus said. Not because of threats, not because of car accidents, not because of anything. I know, Frank's eyes were closing now. That's why I wanted to tell you something before it's too late. Tell me what... Your grandmother, she left something else, something she never told anyone about, something even the letters didn't mention. Marcus leaned closer. What are you talking about? The night before she died? She called me. First time in 30 years. She said... Frank coughed again, his body shaking. She said there was one more secret, one more thing she'd hidden, something bigger than the lithium, bigger than the murders. What was it? She didn't tell me, just said, if anything happened to her, to tell you to look where the horse sleeps. Where the horse sleeps. Frank's eyes closed. That's all she said, where the horse sleeps. She said you'd understand when you were ready. The monitors began beeping. Nurses rushed in. Marcus was pushed back, away from the bed, away from the answers he needed. Frank survived the night, but he didn't wake up again. The doctors said he might never wake up. Another casualty of a war that had been going on for 50 years. Marcus returned to the cabin at dawn. Emma was still asleep. Ruth was making coffee in the kitchen, her face lined with worry. How is he in the coma? They don't know if he'll recover. Marcus, what's happening? I thought this was over. It's never over. Not really. Marcus sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Someone tried to kill Frank. Someone who doesn't want us digging up any more secrets. What are you going to do? What I always do, keep digging. He told Ruth about Frank's last words, about the secret Eleanor had mentioned, about the message she'd left where the horse sleeps. Ruth frowned. Sargent doesn't have a regular sleeping spot. He wanders all over the property. I know, but there must be somewhere he goes more than others, somewhere special. The barn, maybe? But we built that after you arrived. Eleanor's original barn collapsed years ago. Marcus stood suddenly. Where was the original barn? About 100 yards behind the house, near the old well. Show me. They walked through the early morning mist breath clouding in the cold air. Ruth pointed to a clearing where the grass grew differently, marking the footprint of a structure that had long since returned to the earth. Sargent was standing in the middle of it. The old horse looked at Marcus with those knowing eyes, then lowered his head and pawed at the ground. He does this sometimes, Ruth said. Stands here for hours. I always thought he was just remembering. He's not remembering. Marcus walked toward the horse. He's waiting. He knelt where Sargent was pawing, brushing away the grass and dirt. His fingers touched something solid. Metal? Rusted, but intact. Ruth, get me a shovel. An hour later, Marcus had unearthed a metal box the size of a small suitcase. It was locked with a combination padlock that had frozen solid with our age. He broke it with the shovel. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and plastic, were documents, photographs, recordings on ancient cassette tapes, and a letter in Eleanor's handwriting. My dearest Marcus, he read aloud, his voice shaking. If you're reading this, then you found everything. Not just the lithium samples, not just the evidence of contamination, but the real secret, the one I couldn't tell anyone, the one that kept me silent for 50 years. Harrison Whitmore didn't act alone. He had partners. Powerful partners in government and industry who helped him cover up the crimes. Senators, judges, corporate executives. A network that spans the entire country. I have proof of all of it. Recordings, documents, photographs. enough to bring down not just Apex, but the entire system that protected them. I couldn't release this while I was alive. They would have killed me. They would have killed anyone who knew. So I waited. I hid. I played the crazy old woman everyone expected me to be. But I never stopped gathering evidence, never stopped documenting, never stopped preparing for the day when someone would be strong enough to finish what I started. That someone is you, Marcus. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I'm sorry I had to leave you this burden, but I know you can carry it. I've watched you from a distance your whole life. I've seen the man you've become. You're a Cole, you're stubborn, you're brave, and you don't give up. Use this evidence wisely. The people it exposes are dangerous. They've killed before, and they'll kill again. But they're also old, they're dying, and their power is fading. The world is ready for the truth now. It wasn't ready 50 years ago. It wasn't ready when I was young enough to fight, but it's ready now. Finish it, Marcus, for your grandfather, for the men in the mine shaft, for all the families who suffered in silence, for me. And when it's done, when the truth is finally free, do something I never got to do. Be happy, be at peace, live the life I couldn't live because I was too busy fighting. You deserve it, you've earned it. All my love forever, Grandma Eleanor. Marcus sat in the dirt surrounded by 50 years of secrets and wept. The documents revealed a conspiracy that went far beyond anything he'd imagined. Harrison Whitmore had been just the public face of a network that included 3 former senators, 2 federal judges, a dozen corporate CEOs, and countless local officials across Appalachia. They called themselves the Mountain Trust. A gentleman's agreement dating back to the 1960s designed to coordinate the exploitation of mineral rights across the region while protecting each other from legal consequences. Eleanor had infiltrated their network slowly, patiently over decades. She'd recorded phone calls, photographed secret meetings, collected documents that should have been destroyed. She'd been a spy in her own life, playing the role of crazy old woman while gathering enough evidence to bring down some of the most powerful people in America. This is incredible, Victoria said, reviewing the materials in her office. This isn't just one lawsuit, this is a RICO case, organized crime, federal jurisdiction. What do we do with it? We do exactly what your grandmother wanted. We use it wisely. Victoria spread the documents across her desk. But Marcus, you need to understand what this means. These people, the ones who are still alive, they're going to fight back. They're going to use every resource they have to destroy you. They already tried. They failed. That was Apex alone. This is different. This is senators and judges and people who've been untouchable for 50 years. Victoria met his eyes. Are you ready for that kind of fight? Marcus thought about Frank in the hospital, about the bodies in the mine shaft, about his grandmother playing crazy for 50 years while she gathered the weapons for a war she knew she'd never live to fight. I was born ready, he said. I just didn't know it until now. The FBI raid happened 3 weeks later. Marcus watched from his cabin as federal agents descended on properties across 5 states. Former Senator James Morrison, Judge Catherine Black, CEO Thomas Randall of Consolidated Mining. 14 arrests in a single day. The news called it the biggest corruption case in Appalachian history. The Mountain Trust exposed. 50 years of crimes laid bare. Victoria held a press conference on the courthouse steps. This investigation would not have been possible without the courage of one woman, she said. Eleanor Cole spent 50 years gathering this evidence. She sacrificed her reputation, her relationships, and ultimately her life to protect the truth. Today, we honor her memory by ensuring that the men who destroyed so many families will finally face justice. Marcus stood at the back of the crowd holding Emma's hand. Daddy, is it over now? Almost, baby, almost. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The arrests were just the beginning. Trials would take years. Appeals would take longer. The system that had protected these men would fight to protect them still. The war his grandmother had started wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Spring came early that year. Marcus was working on the barn when he heard the car coming up the driveway. He reached for the pistol he'd started carrying again, then relaxed when he recognized Victoria's sedan. She got out with a folder in her hand and an expression he couldn't read. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I have something to show you. She handed him the folder. The forensic accountants finished tracing Apex's assets, all of them. Marcus opened the folder. Numbers, lots of numbers, bank accounts, properties, investments spanning decades. What am I looking at? The full value of the lithium deposit under your grandmother's land, current market valuation. Marcus found the number. His heart stopped. That can't be right. It is. We had it verified 3 times. But that's $12.4 billion. Victoria's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. Your grandmother was sitting on one of the largest lithium deposits in North America, and she never knew. Marcus sat down on a pile of lumber. His legs wouldn't hold him. $12 billion. The settlement you received was a fraction of its true value. Apex knew. They always knew. That's why they fought so hard. That's why they were willing to kill. What happens now? That's up to you. The deposit is on your land. It belongs to you. You could sell the mining rights. You could develop it yourself. You could... Victoria paused. You could do whatever you want. You're one of the richest men in America. Marcus looked at the barn, at the cabin, at the mountain rising behind them. I don't want to be rich. I know, but you are. And you have to decide what to do with it. He thought about his grandmother, about her letters, about the woman who'd hidden treasure worth billions because she knew it would attract the wrong kind of attention. The foundation, he said slowly. We use it for the foundation, not for mining, for protection. We buy the mineral rights from every family we help. We create a trust that preserves these mountains forever. That would cost $12 billion more. Marcus shook his head. My grandmother didn't care about money. She cared about truth. She cared about justice. She cared about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. And you? I care about finishing what she started, not by becoming what they were, rich men exploiting the land, but by being what she was, a guardian, a protector. He met Victoria's eyes. Can we do that legally? We can do anything. You're a billionaire now. Victoria smiled. Welcome to the 1%. What would you like to destroy first? The Appalachian Preservation Trust was established in June. It was the largest environmental conservation effort in the region's history. $12 billion dedicated to purchasing mineral rights, protecting watersheds, and ensuring that what happened to the Cole family would never happen to anyone else. Marcus signed over everything. The lithium deposit, the land rights, the future that could have made him one of the wealthiest men in America. He kept the cabin, he kept the 47 acres, he kept enough money to ensure Emma would never want for anything. Everything else went to the trust. Are you sure about this? Ruth asked him the day the papers were finalized. That's more money than most people can imagine. I'm sure. Marcus watched Emma playing in the yard with children from town, children whose families had been helped by the foundation, children who would grow up knowing that someone had fought for them. My grandmother didn't hide that evidence because she wanted to be rich. She hid it because she wanted to be believed. She wanted the truth to matter. She wanted people to know that what happened to her family was wrong. And now they know? Now they know. Marcus smiled. That's worth more than $12 billion. That's worth everything. The memorial service was held on the 1-year anniversary of the original verdict. They gathered at Eleanor Cole's grave, a simple stone marker, on the hillside behind the cabin where she could watch the mountain forever. Marcus, Emma, Ruth, Victoria, Walter, Sarah Whitmore. Families from across Appalachia who'd been helped by the foundation, reporters who'd covered the story, government officials who'd finally listened, and Frank Mercer in a wheelchair awake at last after months of rehabilitation. His voice was slurred and his hands shook, but he'd insisted on being there. Marcus stood before the gathering with a piece of paper in his hands. His grandmother's final letter, the one he'd found buried where the horse slept. My grandmother wrote this before she died, he said. She never expected me to read it. She never expected anyone to find what she'd hidden. She was just preserving the truth, because that's what she did. For 50 years, alone. He looked at the faces before him, some crying, some nodding, all understanding. She asked me to do something when this was over. She asked me to be happy, to be at peace, to live the life she couldn't live. His voice caught. I'm trying, Grandma. Every day I'm trying. Emma stepped forward and placed a flower on the grave, a single wildflower picked from the meadow where Sargent liked to graze. Great-Grandma Eleanor, she said softly, I never got to meet you, but Daddy tells me about you every night. He says you were the bravest person he ever knew, braver than soldiers, braver than anyone. She paused, her small face serious. I want to be brave like you when I grow up. I want to tell the truth even when people don't believe me. I want to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. She touched the gravestone gently. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being my great-grandma. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, tears streaming down his face. "She can hear you, baby. Wherever she is, she can hear you." "I know." Emma looked up at him with Eleanor's stubborn eyes. "She's not really gone, is she? She's in the mountain. She's in the foundation. She's in all the families we've helped." "Yeah." Marcus pulled his daughter close. "She's everywhere. She always will be." The crowd dispersed slowly. People returned to their cars, to their lives, to the future that Eleanor Cole had made possible. But Marcus stayed at the grave a while longer. "I hope I made you proud," he whispered. "I hope I finished what you started. I hope—" He couldn't finish. The words wouldn't come, but he felt something. A warmth in the cold November air, a presence that might have been imagination and might have been something more. And in the distance, standing at the edge of the forest, Sargent raised his head and whinnied once. A sound of completion. A sound of peace. A sound that said, "Well done." 2 years after the verdict, Marcus woke to silence. Not the ordinary silence of mountain mornings, but something different. Something wrong. He lay still in bed, listening, and realized what was missing. Sargent wasn't calling for breakfast. Every morning for 2 years, the old horse had greeted the dawn with a whinny that echoed across the valley. Marcus had set his internal clock by that sound. It was as reliable as the sunrise, as constant as the mountain itself. Today, nothing. He was out of bed before he finished the thought. Pulling on boots and jacket, moving through the cabin without waking Emma. The pre-dawn darkness was cold against his face as he crossed the yard toward the barn. "Sargent." No answer, no movement, no sound of hooves on straw. Marcus found him lying in his stall, eyes closed, breath shallow and slow. The old horse's coat had lost its silver shimmer. His legs, always stiff, were folded beneath him in a way that said he wasn't getting up again. "Oh no, 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 no." Marcus knelt in the straw and placed his hand on Sargent's neck. The horse's eyes fluttered open. Recognition flickered there and something else. Peace. Acceptance. The knowledge of an animal who had done what he was meant to do. "Not yet, old man, please, not yet." Sargent nickered softly. It sounded like goodbye. "You can't leave. Emma needs you. I need you. You're supposed to be here. You're supposed to—" Marcus's voice broke. "You're the last piece of her, the last thing she touched. I can't lose that too." The horse pressed his nose against Marcus's hand. Warm breath, steady heartbeat, but slowing, fading. "You waited for me," Marcus whispered. "All those years. You waited for me to come home. You showed me where to look. You—" He couldn't finish. Sargent's eyes held his. And in that moment, Marcus understood something he'd never let himself believe. The horse had been waiting, not just for Marcus to arrive, but for Marcus to be ready to say goodbye. "Thank you," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for taking care of her, for keeping the secret, for leading me to the truth. Thank you for everything." Sargent's eyes closed. His breath slowed. One long exhale, then stillness. The last witness to Eleanor Cole's 50-year war was gone. Marcus buried him beside Eleanor's grave. He dug through the morning, refusing help from Walter and Frank, despite their offers. This was something he needed to do himself. Something he owed to the horse who had carried his grandmother's secrets across decades of waiting. Emma came out when the sun was high, still in her pajamas, face streaked with tears. "I wanted to say goodbye." "I know, baby. I'm sorry. It happened so fast." "Was he in pain?" "No, he was peaceful. He knew it was time." Emma knelt beside the grave and placed her hand on the fresh earth. "He was really old, wasn't he? Ruth says horses don't usually live that long." "He was very old. Older than horses are supposed to be." "Why do you think he lived so long?" Marcus considered the question. He thought about his grandmother's letters, about the secrets hidden where the horse slept, about an animal who had refused to die until his final mission was complete. "I think he had something to do, Hunia," Marcus said, "and he wouldn't let himself go until it was done." "What did he have to do?" "Lead me home. Show me where to look. Help me finish what your great-grandmother started." Marcus pulled Emma close. He was a soldier in his own way, and soldiers don't quit until the mission is over. "Is the mission over now?" Marcus looked at the two graves side by side. His grandmother who had fought alone for 50 years, her horse who had waited just as long. "Their mission is over," he said, "but ours is just beginning." The anniversary of the verdict brought visitors from across the country, families who'd been helped by the foundation, lawyers who'd worked on the cases, journalists who'd covered the story, politicians who'd finally listened. Marcus stood on the cabin porch and watched them arrive. Cars filled the meadow where Sargent used to graze. Tents sprouted like mushrooms. Children ran through the grass, their laughter echoing against the mountain. "This is insane," Ruth said, standing beside him with a clipboard and a look of mild panic. "We were expecting maybe 50 people. There's at least 300. 412, Victoria corrected, joining them on the porch. "I counted, and more are coming." "Why?" "Because of what this place represents." Victoria gestured at the gathering crowd. "Hope, justice, the possibility that one person can make a difference against impossible odds." She smiled. "Your grandmother would be overwhelmed." "My grandmother would be hiding in the root cellar." "Fair point." Emma emerged from the cabin wearing a dress that Ruth had bought her for the occasion. She looked older, somehow more serious, though she was only 11. "Daddy, there's a woman asking for you. She says her name is Martha Peterson." Marcus's heart stuttered. "Peterson?" "She says her father was James Peterson, one of the men in the mine shaft." The woman was waiting by Eleanor's grave. She was in her 70s, gray-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with her hands. She was holding a photograph, staring at the gravestone with an expression Marcus couldn't read. "Mrs. Peterson." She turned. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Cole, I wanted to thank you in person." She held out the photograph. "This is my father, James Peterson. He disappeared in 1974. I was 16 years old." Marcus took the photograph. A young man in work clothes smiling at the camera with the easy confidence of someone who didn't know what was coming. "For 48 years, I didn't know what happened to him. My mother died believing he'd abandoned us. My brothers spent their whole lives angry at a ghost." Martha's voice cracked. "And then you found him. You gave him back to us." "I'm sorry it took so long." "Don't be sorry. Be proud." She gripped his hands with surprising strength. "You gave my father a grave. You gave his name back, its honor. You gave my family peace. My grandmother found him. I just finished what she started." "No," Martha shook her head firmly. "Your grandmother hid the truth. You set it free. There's a difference." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic, a dog tag tarnished with age. "This was my father's, from his service in World War II. I want you to have it." "I can't accept that." "You can. You will." She pressed it into his palm. "Because my father would have wanted to thank you himself, and this is the only way he can." Marcus looked at the dog tag. "James Peterson. Serial number, blood type. A whole life reduced to metal and numbers." "I'll keep it safe," he said. "I promise." "I know you will." Martha smiled through her tears. "That's what Coles do. They keep things safe until the world is ready." The ceremony began at noon. Marcus hadn't planned to speak. He'd prepared remarks, written and rewritten them a dozen times, but the words felt wrong. Too formal. Too distant. Not like his grandmother at all. So when Victoria introduced him, he left his notes on the chair and walked to the podium with empty hands. "My grandmother was not a public speaker," he began. "She was a cook, a farmer, a woman who talked to her horse more than she talked to people." Soft laughter from the crowd. "But she was also the bravest person I ever knew, braver than any soldier I served with in Afghanistan, braver than anyone who ever wore a uniform or carried a weapon." Silence now. Attention. "She fought a war for 50 years, alone, against enemies with unlimited money and power. She was called crazy, paranoid, delusional. She watched her husband die from poison they put in her water. She watched her community turn against her. She watched her own family, including me, abandon her because we were too embarrassed to believe." His voice caught. He let it. And she never gave up, never stopped fighting, never stopped believing that someday someone would listen. He looked at the faces before him, families who understood, survivors who had walked the same road. "I didn't come here to be a hero. I came because I had nowhere else to go, a homeless veteran and his daughter looking for shelter. That's all we were." Emma smiled at him from the front row. "But my grandmother had other plans. She'd been waiting for decades, preparing, hiding evidence, writing letters, trusting that someday someone would come home and find what she'd hidden." He paused, letting the silence build. "She couldn't have known it would be me. She couldn't have known I'd be broken enough to need saving and stubborn enough to finish the fight. But somehow she knew. Somehow she trusted." He thought about Sargent, about the letters, about an old woman playing crazy while she built an arsenal of truth. "The foundation we've built, the families we've helped, the justice we've achieved, none of it would exist without Eleanor Cole. She did the hard work. She carried the weight. She held the line for 50 years while the rest of the world looked away." He straightened his shoulders. I'm not a hero. I'm just her grandson. I'm just the person she trusted to finish what she started." He looked at Eleanor's grave at the fresh earth beside it where Sargent lay. "And I hope I pray that she's proud of what we've done." The crowd erupted. Applause and cheers and tears and the sound of people who finally understood what had been sacrificed for their freedom. Marcus stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed. Emma ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "That was amazing, Daddy." "I meant every word." "I know. That's why it was amazing." Victoria appeared beside them, eyes wet. "Your grandmother would have hated that speech." "I know. But she would have been proud anyway." "I hope so." The day stretched into evening. People shared stories, ate food, laughed and cried, and healed together. Musicians played mountain songs that Eleanor might have known. Children chased fireflies as the sun went down. And Marcus watched it all from the cabin porch, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Home. He was finally home. The phone call came at sunset. Marcus was alone on the porch watching the last guest depart when his phone buzzed. "Mr. Cole, this is Agent Williams from the FBI." Marcus tensed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. We have news. Good news." A pause. "Former Senator Morrison just entered a guilty plea. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentencing." "What does that mean?" "It means he's naming names. Everyone in the Mountain Trust. Every crime they committed. Every family they hurt." Another pause. "Mr. Cole, he's confirmed 11 more murder victims. People we didn't even know were missing." Marcus closed his eyes. 11 more families. 11 more graves to find. 11 more stories of suffering and silence. "There's something else," Agent Williams continued. "Morrison says your grandmother contacted him in 1998, tried to negotiate, offered to stay silent about everything if they'd just leave her alone. She negotiated with them. She tried. Morrison says they laughed at her, told her no one would ever believe a crazy old woman." Williams's voice softened. "But she kept records of that conversation too. Recordings, documents, everything she could gather. She never stopped." "No, sir, she never stopped. Even when she was trying to make peace, she was building her case." Williams paused. "Sir, I've been with the Bureau for 23 years. I've never seen anything like what your grandmother did. The patience, the discipline, the absolute refusal to give up. That was who she was. Well, whoever she was, she's responsible for the biggest corruption prosecution in Appalachian history. The Mountain Trust is finished. Every survivor, every family, every victim, they all owe her a debt they can never repay." Marcus looked at Eleanor's grave, barely visible in the fading light. She didn't want to be repaid. She just wanted to be believed. "She was, sir. Finally, she was." The last car drove away at 9 p.m. Marcus stood alone in the meadow, surrounded by the debris of celebration. Paper plates and plastic cups, folding chairs and scattered napkins. The evidence of a community that had gathered to honor a woman most of them had never met. "Daddy." Emma was walking toward him through the darkness, wrapped in a blanket, her face tired but content. "Hey, baby, I thought you were asleep." "I couldn't sleep, too much in my head." "What kind of things—" Emma came to stand beside him, looking up at the stars. "I was thinking about great-grandma Eleanor, about how lonely she must have been." She was lonely, very lonely. But she had Sargent and Ruth and Walter. That's true. And she had us, even if we didn't know it. Emma looked up at him with serious eyes. She was working for us the whole time, wasn't she, even when we weren't here, even when we didn't believe her? Marcus felt his throat tighten. Yes, she was. That's what love is, isn't it? Working for people, even when they don't know it. Fighting for people, even when they don't believe you. Where did you learn that? From you. Emma smiled. You fought for me when I didn't understand. When I was little and scared and didn't know why we were sleeping in the truck. You kept fighting even when I couldn't help. Marcus knelt so he was at her level. You helped more than you know? Every day just by being you. By giving me something worth fighting for. And now we get to help other people, like great-grandma Eleanor helped us. That's right. So her fight isn't really over. It just changed into our fight. Marcus pulled his daughter close, 11 years old and already wiser than most adults he'd known. When did you get so smart? I learned from great-grandma Eleanor. She was the smartest person in the family. She was. She really was. They walked back to the cabin together, hand in hand, leaving the debris of celebration behind. Tomorrow, Ruth would organize a cleanup crew. Tomorrow, the foundation would resume its work. Tomorrow, more families would find the help they needed. But tonight was for rest, for reflection, for gratitude. Tonight was for Eleanor Cole. 3 years after the verdict, Marcus was working in the garden when the stranger appeared. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair and nervous eyes. She stood at the edge of the property like she was afraid to come closer. "Can I help you? Are you Marcus Cole?" "I am." I need to tell you something about your grandmother." Marcus set down his tools and walked toward her. Up close, she looked exhausted, haunted, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. "What's your name?" "Jennifer. Jennifer Morrison." "Morrison, the senator's family." "I'm James Morrison's granddaughter." She continued, confirming what he'd already guessed. "I know what my grandfather did. I know about the Mountain Trust. I know about everything." "Why are you here?" "Because I found something. In my grandfather's papers after he went to prison." She pulled an envelope from her bag. "Letters. From your grandmother, from the 1990s. Marcus took the envelope carefully, his grandmother's handwriting on the front faded but unmistakable. "She wrote to my grandfather for 5 years, Jennifer said, begging him to come forward, offering to protect him if he told the truth, promising that she'd testify in his favor if he helped her expose the others. He never responded." "He did, once?" Jennifer's voice broke. "He told her that the truth wasn't worth dying for, that some secrets were better left buried, that she should accept her place and stop making trouble." Marcus opened the envelope. His grandmother's words preserved across decades. "Dear Senator Morrison, I am writing to you one final time. I know you will not respond. I know you think I am a foolish old woman with nothing to offer and nothing to threaten. But I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, not because what you did was acceptable, but because carrying hatred is a burden I can no longer afford. I will continue fighting. I will continue gathering evidence. I will continue waiting for the day when someone believes me, but I will do it without hating you, because hate is what you want. Hate keeps people weak. Hate keeps people silent. I choose something different. I choose hope. Someday someone will come. Someone will find what I've hidden. Someone will finish what I've started. And when they do, I hope you're still alive to see it. Not for revenge, but so you'll know that you were wrong. The truth is always worth fighting for. Eleanor Cole. Marcus read the letter twice, his grandmother's voice reaching across years as clear and stubborn as ever. "I'm sorry," Jennifer whispered. "For what my family did. For the silence. For everything." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm pregnant." She touched her stomach gently. "And I don't want my child to grow up carrying the weight of lies. I don't want to pass on what was passed to me." "What do you want?" "I want to help. The foundation. The families. Whatever I can do." She met his eyes. "I can't undo what my grandfather did. But maybe I can help build something different." Marcus thought about his grandmother's letter. About forgiveness. About choosing hope over hatred. "Your grandfather is still in prison," he said carefully. "Some of the families he hurt will never forgive him." "I know. And some of them will hate you just for being his blood." "I know." "You're sure you want to be part of this?" Jennifer nodded. "I'm sure. Because your grandmother was right. The truth is always worth fighting for. And my child deserves to be born into a family that believes that." Marcus extended his hand. "Welcome to the fight." 5 years after the verdict, Emma graduated from high school. Marcus sat in the audience surrounded by Ruth and Victoria and Walter and Frank and Sarah and Jennifer and dozens of others who had become family over the years. The foundation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. 43 families helped. Over $1 billion. The colonists recovered. The Appalachian Preservation Trust protecting more than 2 million acres. And now his daughter, 17 years old, was walking across the stage to receive her diploma. Emma Cole, the principal announced, who will be attending Georgetown University in the fall to study environmental law. Applause erupted. Marcus was crying before he knew it. Emma found him afterward, diploma in hand, face glowing with joy and nerves. "I did it, Daddy. You did it, baby. Georgetown, just like we planned. Just like your great-grandmother would have wanted." Emma touched the small pin on her dress. A silver horse, a gift from Ruth on her 16th birthday. Do you think she knows wherever she is? Marcus looked at the sky, at the mountains in the distance, at the world his grandmother had helped change. She knows, she's always known. How can you be sure? Because that's what Coles do. We watch, we wait, we never give up. Emma hugged him fiercely. I'm going to make you proud, Daddy. I'm going to make her proud. I'm going to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. You already have, baby, every day, just by being who you are. They walked out of the auditorium together into a world that Eleanor Cole had helped reshape. A world where the truth was no longer buried, where the powerful could no longer hide their crimes, where one stubborn woman's 50-year war had finally been won. 10 years after the verdict, Marcus stood at Eleanor's grave for the last time. He was 64 now. His legs still ached from the old injury, but his hands had stopped shaking years ago. The nightmares came less frequently. The memories of Afghanistan had faded into something softer, something he could carry without being crushed. Emma was married now with a daughter of her own. She'd named her Eleanor. The baby had her great-great-grandmother's stubborn eyes. I brought someone to meet you, Marcus said, kneeling beside the gravestone. He held up the baby for the grave to see. This is Eleanor Rose Cole. She's 3 months old. She has your temper. The baby gurgled. Emma is a lawyer now. Environmental law just like she planned. She's helping families in West Virginia fight a coal company that's been poisoning their water for 20 years. He smiled. Sound familiar? The mountain was quiet, peaceful. The cabin had been expanded over the years, turned into a museum and education center for the foundation, but this hillside with its 2 graves remained untouched. A sacred space. A memorial. The foundation helped 73 families last year. We've protected 4 million acres of mountain land. The Appalachian Preservation Trust is the largest environmental organization in the eastern United States. He paused, struggling with the next words. And I'm retiring. Victoria is taking over the foundation. Sarah is leading the trust. Emma is doing what you did. Fighting the fights that need fighting. He touched the gravestone gently. I finished it, Grandma. Everything you started. Everything you hid. Everything you waited 50 years for someone to find. Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them away. I was so angry at you, for so many years, angry that you were crazy, angry that you embarrassed the family, angry that you wouldn't just let it go and be normal. He laughed bitterly. But you were never crazy. You were the sanest person I've ever known. You saw the truth when everyone else was blind. You fought when everyone else surrendered. You waited when everyone else gave up. Baby Eleanor reached toward the gravestone, tiny fingers grasping at air. She has your stubbornness, Marcus said. 3 months old and already refusing to sleep when she's tired. Emma says it's karma. I say it's inheritance. He stood slowly, his joints protesting. I'm going to be around for a while longer. The doctors say I'm healthy. The therapists say I'm healing. The family says I'm finally learning to relax. He smiled. But when it's my time, I'm going to be buried right here, beside you, beside Sargent, on the mountain you loved in the land you protected, surrounded by the truth you refused to let die. He looked at the sky, clear and blue and endless. Thank you, Grandma, for everything, for the letters, for the evidence, for the stubborn, patient, unbreakable love that saved my life. He held baby Eleanor close. I'll see you again someday. Until then, I'll keep fighting. We all will. That's what Coles do. He walked down the hill toward the cabin, toward the family waiting for him, toward the life his grandmother had made possible through 50 years of silence and strength. Behind him, the mountain stood eternal and unchanging. And somewhere in the wind, Marcus heard a sound, a soft whinny, a woman's laugh, the echo of voices that had waited so long to be heard. The truth was finally free. The fight was finally won. And Eleanor Cole, the crazy old woman who never stopped believing, had finally come home. Marcus Cole closed his eyes and smiled. He was at peace. He was grateful. He was exactly where he was meant to be. And that was enough. That was everything. The mountain held its secrets no more, and a family's legacy would endure forever.